At the top of the show, we showed you where we go from here in the impeachment inquiry from a process standpoint, but still, there's a ton of people that we haven't heard from who could be central parts of this narrative. Now, I'm talking about people on your screen you see there: Rudy Giuliani, John Bolton, Mike Pompeo, and Mick Mulvaney, two names heard prominently in this past week, and of course the Vice President Mike Pence. All have been mentioned in witness testimony, and any one of them could provide possibly the John Dean moment people say they've been clamoring for. My next guest is one of the 17 Watergate prosecutors who recently penned a piece in the Washington Post saying Trump ought to be impeached. Nick Akerman joins me now. He's also former assistant U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York. All right. So, Nick, I think the prosecution, if you will, put on a compelling case. I think the witnesses acquitted themselves very well. It was clear, obviously, one side of the aisle was not interested in any fact-finding. And I don't even know if there was a videotape with crystal clear audio having the president telling Zelensky, you're not getting your money until you announce on a press conference you're going to go get dirt on Biden here. We won't meet with you. You won't see money. You got to do that for me. That's the quid and that's the quo. Even with that, I don't know if hearts and minds will be changed. But nonetheless, let's say they could. Do you believe any of the people that I mentioned could put the president with Zelensky in a compelling way that will reconfirm some of the testimony we already heard that potentially would be damning enough evidence to change opinions in the Senate?
I think the one person you mentioned that could do that is John Bolton. But, you know, we just don't know if he's going to come forward and testify. I mean, I think that the House has taken the right approach. They're not going to go to court and waste time trying to subpoena people and force them to come into Congress to testify. It's just going to delay things. And they don't really need it. I mean, they've got a good case as it stands now. And I think there's a pretty strong argument that the fact that none of these people will testify means that if they did, the only reason they're not showing up is because what they have to say is incriminating to Trump.
Let me ask you a hypothetical, and it's a very possible one, I think. Goes to the Senate. And all of a sudden Bolton says, you know what, I want to testify. Or the court says, go ahead, you can testify. Is it up to McConnell to say, nope, 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 I'm going to choose the witness list? How does that work?
Because he can't pick who he wants to hear from. The Democratic House gets to put on their case. And if they want to put on Bolton as a witness, they can put him on as a witness. If the Republicans have certain witnesses that the Democrats argue are completely irrelevant, like Hunter Biden, then it's going to be up to the Chief Justice, John Roberts, who's going to be presiding as a judge over this proceeding, and he'll determine whether or not witnesses are relevant, what they have to say is relevant. He'll rule on objections. He's basically going to be the umpire calling the balls and strikes, just like he said he would at his confirmation hearing.
So we talked witnesses. Let's talk evidence. The Supreme Court's going to have to decide one way or the other whether or not they're going to decide to hear the case regarding Trump's tax returns. It would seem, at least, that this has been asked and answered, and this, at least on its face, doesn't seem like something the Supreme Court would rehear. If they decide to say, yep, it's settled, you guys got 8 years of his returns, have at it, that, the other maybe stuff that the State Department still hasn't released, maybe the things that's sitting on the server, not just the entire conversation, not the redacted form, but maybe other conversations with Putin. Can you think of evidence, more than just testimony, that also could be significant to putting the president there and also putting motive?
Well, I think the tax returns are a big item. I mean, there is a reason why Donald Trump is fighting the tax returns in California, in New York, and Washington, even though there is a law, a federal law, that allows the Ways and Means Committee to get the tax returns of any taxpayer in the United States. I mean, there is a reason why he's refusing to turn that over. And if you look at the New York Times report that did a very detailed analysis of the Trump's tax situation going back to his father and how he basically evaded taxes by setting up a phony company, putting phony numbers on various items that were either gifts or loans. All of this, of course, most of it is outside the statute of limitations, which for tax violations, 6 years. But we do know that in 2016, there were certain properties that were sold to one of Trump's sons for a really deflated rate that just didn't make sense. Again, it would appear to be evasion on gift tax. So I think we've got a history there that once you get into these returns, you're going to find some pretty amazing information on there relating to tax fraud that's gone on for many, many years. There's no other explanation as to why Trump would be so strenuously fighting to keep those returns from going public.
And does your gut tell you the Supreme Court's going to hear the case or not?
My gut tells me they're not. I mean, it really isn't a case that warrants granting cert on. It is not as significant as the tapes case in U.S. v. Nixon, where Nixon had actual evidence of criminal activity that either would exculpate or inculpate the defendants in the Watergate trial at the time. This, to me, seems like a pretty straightforward case, particularly with the District Attorney's Office in New York, the idea that you can't get tax returns from a tax preparer in a criminal investigation. I mean, I just don't see the Supreme Court getting into that. I think they're probably just going to deny cert and leave it at that.
We've had multiple conversations, and you've laid out that you believe there's a stronger case here than even with Nixon in terms of impeachment. To that end, I got to tell you, it seemed that obstruction worked. Not making these witnesses available for the White House, while it's not in the pursuit of justice and not in the interests of America, I think it worked for him. And moreover, I'm wondering if there was a Fox News around when you guys were prosecuting the case against Nixon, and a Republican Party where you didn't have even a Baker or a Thompson at least willing to ask some questions, let alone a Goldwater going up to the Hill saying it's over, Nixon probably would have survived in today's climate, wouldn't he have?
Well, I don't know about that. I mean, I think what happened was with the Nixon situation, the Republicans were pretty much the same. I mean, they were sticking together for the most part, opposing impeachment. It was actually that final tape that came out where Nixon was overheard directing his aides to get the CIA to call the FBI and tell them to lay off the Watergate investigation and the break-in, that it was a national security matter, and that's what sort of the tipping point was. And I think, you know, there's a lot of dynamics here that could change as this goes on. I mean, the evidence was extremely compelling. You've got an actual transcript of Trump basically extorting and bribing the president of Ukraine. I mean, it's all right there. Everything else is kind of icing on the cake. So the question is, what happens when it gets to the Senate? Does someone like Bolton testify? Do certain Republicans come forward and say, you know, we're going to vote to remove him from office? And if that happens, and you've got 20 Republicans that are up for re-election in the Senate, they all look at each other and say, look, this is a guy we never really had a real compassion for in the first place. It's not somebody we've known like Richard Nixon, who had been around from 1948 to 1974 in politics. He had people that would really go to the mat for him, people that would take a bullet for him. I'm not sure Donald Trump's got anybody like that. Look what happened with Gordon Sondland. I mean, he came in there and did what he had to do to make sure that his liability, you know, was erased, which he did. So we don't know what's going to happen.
Obviously, we'll stay tuned. Nick, I appreciate the time as always. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
All right, everyone, when we come back, obviously we've been focused, as you'd expect, on impeachment all week long, but other developments in D.C. happen as well. We're going to talk about those, including the president, again, trying to help a Navy SEAL accused of war crimes get off scot-free, and also the latest examples of the administration behaving badly with your taxpayer dollars.